Welcome Internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to do a little something special, as we're not going to review an article or a book published by someone, but the Deontological Code of French Psychologists, which I have here. So this is the code by which all of us French psychologists have to abide by. So just so you know, these codes are composed of 56 articles, which cover a whole plethora of situations. Of course, there's the clinical psychologist, but there's also the researcher, there's also the teacher, and there's also the methods. So it's very complete as a whole, because what you should know about France, which is very interesting, is that there is only one title, the title of psychologist. Every other denomination, like clinical, neuropsychologist, a social psychologist, all of that are subspecialties, but there's only one title. It's something that was fought for and chosen by French psychologists to create a unicity of everyone. So we only have one code for all of us, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. So it's a very wide encompassing code, but I really like it because it really puts in the functions of what we should do and should not do. So of course, these codes and these articles are something that is very important, as we all have to abide by, but they're not law per se. That means that, you won't necessarily be sued by them, but you might, because it's not the unions that are going to sue you or professional organizations, but a patient might sue you. And if you haven't respected that, you're in for big trouble, because no one's going to support you in any way stretch of the imagination. This is law for us. Even though it might not be law in the books, you have to abide by those. And why I find it so great is that fundamentally it's so rich. So the fundamental core of our deontology stands from the fact that we need to respect the patients. The patients, regardless of how you call them, clients, people you do research with, so on and so forth, it's based on respect and on the idea that we have to uphold the psyche of each individual and of all groups, that we need to respect that. So our code is fundamentally based on respect, trust, and understanding of another human, which I find it wonderful, and it's an incredibly good basis to have. So what does that correlate? That means that we have absolutely no right to disclose anything without the explicit agreement of the patient. If the patient, for X or Y reason, for example, intellectual disability, or has fallen into a coma, let's say, you have to get the tutor, the person that's in charge of the case, that is the person that's going to take the decisions. You have to reach an agreement with that person. So it's always fundamentally based on respect and on trust, meaning that, for example, you can't speak about the story of a patient like that. You need to have approval. You have to really explain what you're going to do with the material. You have to, even if you explain everything, you always have to keep the anonymity of each patient completely intact, which is, of course, a default, even in medical settings. But it's very important to have it even in this code, because it's really a fundamental building block of trust between the therapist and the patient. And there's also a lot of very important elements of this, is that you don't use a patient for your own benefits, be it financial, be it for the patient to join a subgroup, even in terrible scenarios, a cult. A patient should never be instrumentalized by a psychologist, ever. You should always also try and go to the fastest possible way of helping the patient, as delaying help in the therapy is a no-go. Like, even if you do psychodynamics, you still have to help the patient with the best of your ability. If you delay things or withhold information that could help and that you know the patient can use, it's fundamentally a mistake and it's completely unwarranted. So you have to go as fast as you can, so to speak. That being said, it's not about like you have to do it in 2 years, or there's nothing of that, because that the code understands fundamentally that there is no like one way or one answer to every situation. You have to really think about it. That's the whole importance in this code, is that it shows us how important ethics are. That you have to always think about the situation at hand. You can't forego the fact of thinking. Even if it's a standard situation, you still have to think about how to deal with things, how to work with the patient, and how to respect the patient within their privacy, intimacy, and in their psychic life. There's a lot of things that also are very important, like how to deal with justice, the justice system. That even if people, let's say you work in a prison, you still, and even if the person is forced to see you, you still have to work to try and build a good relationship and a relationship of mutual trust, even with people that don't have a choice in seeing you as a psychologist, which again, very on point, very good. There's also this very, very interesting element of teamwork, because the French Code of Deontology does stipulate that we can interact with other professions, but we have to be very respectful of those professions, but also make those professions understand that they cannot substitute their knowledge for ours, meaning they can't play psychologists. And that's very important. And it's often as important that a lot of people might be under the a priori that it's easy to do psychology, that psychology is just an opinion with fancy terms, which it is not. It is real knowledge that you agree with or you disagree with, but it is knowledge, and you have to have that knowledge in order to be able to put forward a professional opinion, not a personal, not a hot take, but really a professional opinion on a subject matter. Also, if you share things with others, you have to be sure that what you're sharing is important, that it can help the team understand better, that can help the patient grow better within a certain environment, but you should not overshare. You shouldn't share every detail, because that breaks the privacy of the sessions, and that privacy is essential, and that confidentiality is paramount. So all that is very important and very interesting, but what I really like about the Code of Deontology, and which is kind of surprising the first time you read it, it also talks about how you should exchange with other colleagues, other psychologists. And it's very, very interesting, because at that moment, the Code of Deontology says that we absolutely can share certain experiences we have had with patients, even seek out advice from more experimented psychologists, that we can get help from others, that we are not alone and we shouldn't be alone, that it's even something that's not explicitly stated, but it's completely okay to ask for an opinion of someone else, and that even if you ask for an opinion of someone else, that someone else still has to think with you about the situation, which is very important, very interesting, as often in a private practice, a psychologist can be isolated from his peers, which complexifies everything, because even though we have whole sets of knowledge, that those sets of knowledge still need to be confronted with someone else, and that confrontation always has to take into the whole respect of what we're doing, because as in every other country in the world, in France there's dozens of methodological approaches, therapeutic approaches that are not the same and sometimes enter conflictual zones. But, and this is a big but, we have to treat those conflicts with respect, meaning that we can disagree, we have every right to disagree with one another on everything, but we have to remain fundamentally respectful of what we disagree on. And it has to be argued. It can't be just, I don't know, psychoanalysis is trash, end of story. It has to be, I disagree with psychoanalysis because, or I disagree with CBT because, or I think that approach has to be nuanced. And that's also a very important point in the code, is that everything that we're saying has to be nuanced, that we can't be black and white. It has to be argued, but argued in a very fine, refined, and subtle way. There is no brutal in your face kind of value in this. There is no value in being brutal with the tools of someone else, because if you're brutal with the tools of someone else, that person is going to be pushed further and further away from discussion, and is going to all start to self-loathe his techniques, or on the contrary, build a dogma of, oh, only I am right, or only people who think like me are right and others are fools. And that's what the code is trying to prevent, is by maintaining a healthy discussion, we can all get on board on important stuff, even if we disagree on theories, on the fundamentals of why is a pathology, or how to treat a pathology. We can at least all argue together on why we feel that way. Even if there might not be a consensus, it's still important to be able to discuss this. So it's very interesting that it's even baked into the code that we all to respect all the other approaches if they have proven themselves to be effective, obviously, which is putting this in parentheses, which is a lot of techniques, because psychoanalysis has been proven to be effective, CBT, Gestalt, and excluding a lot of stuff, but so much has been proven to be effective. So it's not this CBT EMDR against the rest of the world. It's more like hundreds of approaches have been proven to be effective, but you choose one and then you have to argue why you've chosen one. And that's okay. That's even good, I think, because it stimulates something of a healthy conversation. And there's also, and that's why another part of the code, which is very interesting, this whole approach of when you're charging patients, you have to charge patients with tact and mesure, as they say in French, meaning that you have to be very tactful about the prices you charge. For example, you can't just be charging 200 euros per session. You have to try and adapt, if you can, to the patient. You have to try your utmost to put a tariff that's okay, that allows you to live as a therapist, which is not always an easy job, trust me. But it's also about how the patient also has to be able to sustain therapy, because that's also another important point, is that it has to be allowed the therapist to live, but it has to be sustainable for the patient as well. So there is that fact that we have to reach a good balance, a good compromise. And that compromise can vary from patient to patient. For example, if you have people that earn 10,000 euros a month, well, they can pay let's say, I'm imagining here, 80 euros a week. It's not going to be a problem. But someone that earns 1,200 euros, 50 might be too much per week. So you have to diminish the price, even though it's not always easy. But that's the whole point of a good clinician, is that they're going to try their utmost so that it's sustainable for everyone involved in the process. So moving on, we have this very interesting thing that the code extends itself also to how you teach psychology. And when I mean teach psychology, it's of course to the students that are going to become psychologists, which you might find interesting that they also have to abide by the code of deontology. It's not because they're students that they're free from it. They have to know it, they have to learn it, and they have to apply it, which is fundamentally important. But this is also in regards to what I do on YouTube, because I am responsible for sharing accurate and good information to you. I am responsible for the image I give of French psychologists throughout the world in my YouTube videos. So it's very interesting to see how even this is submitted to the code, and I have to abide by the code when I'm sharing this with you. Of course, this being said, I don't think anyone is gonna come out for me or even say anything, because I think it's kind of consensual what I'm saying. But just to tell you how the wide variety of stuff included in the code does technically include this, as you have to share an accurate depiction of psychology and psychologists, to others when you're sharing a public opinion like I'm doing now. But it also concerns TV, media, films, and so on and so forth. That it has to be something that you show is respectable, and you have to, in a way, be respected and respectable in your opinions if you're sharing them. Again, very interesting. And the last part is about research and how research needs to be conducted with the consensus and the approval of the people who are being researched upon. And that's very important, as a research cannot be done without an ethics, and that ethics is explicited in the code. So this whole talk is very important, as I feel that this code of deontology helps us and guides us through our profession, and it's always super important, I feel, as a clinician, when you're in doubt about the situation and you're not quite sure, to just check the code, because there are stuff that's in there that really helps. And it helps sometimes also because you have to justify certain decisions, sometimes to other specialists like doctors or educators or nurses, but also sometimes to other psychologists. And having these codes in your mind helps you share your point of view and explain why you made a certain choice. And sometimes it helps you realize where you went wrong also. And that's something that's very important. And I think that, and I'm sure every country has a code of deontology for their therapists and psychologists, but I felt that the French one was very all-encompassing and very good on the number of situations they expose, and how good it is in the fact of us thinking about the situations. So that's pretty much it for the Code of Deontology of French Psychologists. I hope I've expressed it clearly and well enough. And if you have any questions, anything you'd like to ask, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.